Our approach is actually pretty straightforward. We want a multi-vendor strategy to everything.
There will be a new model more powerful than Peter's. We will have the same discussion again.
All right, so let's move on with the program. The next topic that we have, which infrastructures to support new rules of engagement in an AI-enabled cyberspace. My name is Peter Sund. I'm the CEO of the Cybersecurity Alliance operating in Finland. So essentially representing the companies, the research institutions, and the universities engaged with professional competency development and RDI activities. And we have our esteemed panel here, which I will introduce in a moment's time. But before doing so, let me just introduce the topic a bit more briefly. So the sort of thought process for this panel and discussion is really that artificial intelligence has largely been framed as a source of generative power, driving productivity, innovation, military advantage, economic growth, and so on. This narrative, of course, has emphasized the scale, speed, and capability expansion. And of course, that framing is still incomplete as we learn every day something new. But on the other hand, as AI systems become more deeply embedded in our ICT systems, critical infrastructure, decision-making processes via the automation and so on, and the security architectures, they increasingly introduce new strategic vulnerabilities. So now, as opposed to, or in continuation to, what we just learned from Palo Alto 42, now our focus is more on the sort of strategic vulnerabilities, not necessarily the software vulnerabilities as such. So let us move to our esteemed panel, and hoping that we have at least 2 microphones. So so we have with us Ms. Heli Tiirma-Klaar, the chair of the steering group of the Ukraine Defense Contact Group IT Coalition. We have Mr. James Appathuraï, NATO Deputy Assistant Secretary General for Innovation, Hybrid and Cyber. We have Mr. Paolo Palumbo, Vice President, Cyber Threat Intelligence and Research of the company called WithSecure, originating from Finland, and Mr. Mounir Mahjoubi. I will ask all of you to introduce yourselves a little bit more in depth as I invite you with your first initial thoughts. So essentially what I would like to ask you, and feel free to pick any or all of these sort of guiding thoughts, the AI, where does it create genuine strategic leverages, where it generates dependencies or fragilities, how do we go about with the governance, architecture, standardization, and so on, and whether the current frameworks are equipped to manage AI as a long-term security variable. So let me invite all of you to hear your initial opening thoughts.
So, hello, good afternoon. Can you hear me? It looks like this is the Finnish-Estonian table. Then there is a lot in between, and then the rest of the world is there. So it's good to be on the panel chaired by my Finnish colleague here. I'm Heli Tiirma-Klaar. I am an Estonian cyber expert who has had 9 cyber lives, I guess. I set up the Estonian cyber system after 2007 attacks against Estonia. Then I moved on to NATO and European Union. In early days, designing the cyber defense and cybersecurity policies of both organizations. And now I'm back in Estonia and helping Ukraine most of my time. So to answer your question, where the AI is impacting our operations, then as we are closely working with Ukrainians, allow me to maybe explain and give you an overview what we see at the battlefield right now. But before I go to AI question, let me do some advertisement to the IT coalition, in case you are asking what it is. You have heard about the Ramstein format, the Ukraine Defense Contact Group format that helps Ukraine to get airplanes, ships, ammunition, artillery, equipment, and all the military technology necessary to fight this war. So under this format, there is also the IT and Cyber Defense Coalition formed in the end of 2023, chaired by Estonia and Luxembourg. And in last 2 years, we have raised 1.5 billion euros to help Ukraine in both in-kind support by countries and in funding. And we have 18 NATO nations joining this coalition, and we are learning from Ukraine as we are helping them at the same time. So in case there are nations in the room that are interested in still joining, as I said, not all NATO nations are there, then please come to me afterwards and we can talk. The usage of AI on the battlefield has made a great difference. We have seen how Ukraine is winning in recent months, and this is also because the technological layer, what they are using, is getting better and better. You probably have heard about the Delta system, that is the targeting and awareness and situational awareness and acquisition system, helping Ukrainian troops to know where the enemy troops and machines are and helping them to better target. So all these operations are facilitated by AI. It's the, of course, first alert system, which is facilitated by AI, coming from the feeds from cameras from the civilian side, but from the drones and from the military surveillance. So the target acquisition, the last mile targeting, making sure that there is clear distinction between the civilian vehicles and military vehicles. It's not so obvious sometimes because of the very bad visibility and terrain in Ukraine. So the whole mission control is helped by the AI. The common air picture, the command and control, early warning is helped by AI. Also, enemy forces tracking is helped by AI, and data-driven decision making is happening to the commanders. So Ukrainians are running, which is called AI Avengers Lab. And I think many NATO nations are also sometimes using this data, which essentially is the combat AI lab that has the training models on the Ukrainian data. And the Ukrainian Minister of Defense, Fyodorov, recently offered that to all NATO nations. So you can think about the massive data moving around when all this AI-enabled warfare is happening. So the theme of the panel is what kind of infrastructure we need for this kind of new AI era. So what we are certainly looking here is the cloud solutions, facilitating this massive data management that you need at the combat situation. Of course, there are different levels of classification, prompting either on-premise data centers or some data could be in cloud, and there is a very interesting multi-level system how the Ukrainians are right now running the data that is needed for the AI decision making. So I think there are so many questions and so many moving parts when we talk about cloud adoption and cloud management in military context, and not all NATO nations know what they do with the cloud, and all the concepts are still in making as we speak. And many of the NATO nations are learning from Ukraine now also, which is important here. So I stop here. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Let's go over to the next.
Thanks. So I'm James Appathuraï from NATO. I'm a Deputy Assistant Secretary General in the Cyber and Digital Transformation Division, which was renamed when I spent a little and reshuffled when I went over for a little while to NATO's innovation engine at Diana, but now I'm back and very much enjoying this. So I think a lot has been said, and Sam covered a lot. I would say, if we want to look at architecture, because I'll come at it that way, I think that's the way you framed it. From a NATO point of view, from a multinational point of view, building very much on what we just heard, I would say there's probably 3 architectural challenges that we have to meet. One is cloud, because AI requires cloud and data, also for cybersecurity. So the challenge and the art is to build a transatlantic warfighting cloud, which takes advantage of the best that is available from both sides of the Atlantic, that has sufficient flexibility, that is federated to more than one place, that has unclassified, restricted, secure levels, and that, importantly, reassures all allies that despite the efforts towards and concerns about sovereignty, including data sovereignty, that this cloud will ensure capability, sovereignty of data, and reliable service, no matter what the politics are. So that's one level. I'm actually quite confident we can do that, and are doing it. And actually, we've built a lot of it already. I think it'll also, as we finish it off, we'll send a good example that you can actually do this in a transatlantic way, and it's achievable. Second is interoperability. I used this example before. So my country is in Latvia. I'm Canadian. We are operating alongside 19 other countries. We bought our own AI models. We're training them on Canadian data, and then we're deploying with them. But we're right next to, say, Germany. We aren't really there because they're in Estonia, but we're right next to other countries. Germany, for example, will not use Maven Smart System. We might use Maven Smart System, and we're going to train on different data. So when we operate, how do we ensure that our autonomous systems recognize the friend, can at least not kill them, but at least work with them when they have trained on different data, et cetera. So we are working also towards that. It's a real challenge. It requires some kind of a data sharing ecosystem. It requires common ontology. It requires labeling that's done in the right way. And the linkages, including at the very lowest point APIs, so that they can talk to each other. In theory, and technically it's easy to do, getting everyone to implement it is part of our work, but we're doing that as well. So I think those are sort of fundamentals when it comes to architecture. Then there is the cybersecurity architecture, and Sam talked about this a lot. For us, it's really, really important that it's not just NATO, because we are gripping this, but that all allies are doing it, and that includes allies that are less well-developed, less well-resourced, less advanced when it comes to cybersecurity. So we're working on ways to support the less capable. Third is real infrastructure, meaning, and you hinted at this, militarily vital infrastructure on which we depend, civilian infrastructure, for movement of our forces and the collective defense of the alliance. So we are identifying, we know, and nations know, but we're putting together, a really very precise list of what that militarily vital infrastructure is. It's hundreds and hundreds of elements across the alliance, and that includes energy infrastructure and transport and IT, and it's all interconnected. So recently, there was a cable cut in one country, so this is not cyber, but just to give an example, a cable cut in one country which was providing power in another country for refining energy, for refining liquid fuels that go into the NATO pipeline system to defend in a third country. Everything is interconnected. So we have to have a holistic view, and weaknesses in one area of critical infrastructure will have knock-on effects potentially. So we need that, and we are working on that. And then the final point, which is not really a NATO point, but I do think we need to think about the cognitive space as well. Artificial intelligence poses very substantial challenges to cognitive space, to people's understanding of what's true or not, to risks to elections. AI generates bots, it generates deep fakes. These are all used in particular ways. So part of our infrastructure needs to be protecting the infrastructure between our ears.
Thank you very much. So my name is Mounir Mahjoubi. I'm the former French Minister for Digital. I was responsible for the cyber defense first white paper that we made public in 2018. And my point of view today would mostly be on the national wide level and reaction on what we are living right now. In the previous discussion and demonstration, the Vice President of Palo Alto talked about the pace of change that AI introduced in terms of cyber risk. What happened the last 3 weeks, what happened the last 3 months, what happened the last 6 months has never been seen before. But the next regulation to come needs to, that is still not entering the French law yet, started when I was minister 7 years ago. So we are introducing regulation that were sought in a world that were historically, prehistorically, when you compare them to what we are living right now. AI is accelerating the surface attack. It's empowering very strong opponent, but it's also empowering amateur opponent. So we never had that much opponent all over the world. And when we talk about infrastructure, I mostly focus on the economical and social infrastructure. How do we make, by the legal framework, by sensibilization, by public communication, but how do we mobilize all enterprise, SMEs, people, and voting people, all the elected persons in Europe and in France, to take the subject seriously? In order to do all the projects you presented, you need money, and you need a lot of it. And you need strong partner, and you need very strong partner. That also need a lot of money. So historically, the way we do cyber regulation in Europe is to create mandatory investment for strategic economical sector, telling them that your activity is so important to the sovereignty of our continent that you need to invest in cyber, and please invest it in that, and that. If you look at the list of what we ask companies to invest in Nice 2, and when you look at what should be done now, we are already 2 years late. And there's a question of pace. How do we create smart regulation, smart obligation, so that private companies, public entities invest at the right level without being too much precise, because it changes. Great organizations today on cybersecurity are the organizations that are able to change their point of view, their architecture, their way of action every month. When you listen to what happened in Unit 42, they have changed their way of operating in the last 3 months, and they are the top leaders in such subjects. So we have a subject as well in terms of offers. Who are the software providers? Who are the service providers in our continent, in our country, that are at the right level to support public entities and to support private entities? If we answer truly, do we have enough French providers? The answer is we do have, and a lot of them are here today. Are they at the right level? I believe so. Are they at the highest level of state-level attacks? Not necessarily. And so we do have right now an emergency subject in terms of having every decisionary people and the mass population being aware of the situation we are right now. So my final point is to support all these infrastructural and strategical view, we do have here all a mission to deploy the world, to convince, to mobilize ourselves. 2 weeks ago, something terrible happened in France. Another data leaks happened in big public entities. And the reaction was to kill the national cybersecurity entity because they needed to find someone responsible for the problem. So we do now have a new national cybersecurity entity in France because of this new data leak. So what do we with? Nah, it's a summary in English, you can say no. But ANSI is not that happy that the Prime Minister had to say that. But just to tell you that we are not acting at the right moment and at the right pace and with the good reaction should have been to multiply by 10 the ANSI budget, would have been to reinvest a lot in all our entities that have the expertise. So I'm not completely reassured or positive if we take the picture now, but I believe that leaks after leaks and very dangerous and attacks with large effects will have the ability to sensibilize the right people to invest at the right level. But it's not yet done, and NIS2 might never be useful in France. Maybe NIS3 will happen faster, but there is a big subject right now.
Thank you very much. So my name is Paolo Palumbo. As said earlier, I serve as the Vice President for Threat Intelligence at Finnish cybersecurity firm WithSecure. My history is in cybersecurity. I've been doing malware analysis, reverse engineering, designing AI system to detect threat actors for about 25 years, something like that. So I bring a different perspective than the speakers before me. In terms of how we look at the situation, we also look at the battlefield, but the battlefield is a different one. It's the cyber battlefield that we fight to secure every day. Right there, we see that AI in the hands of threat actors is not something that might happen or that is about to happen or it is partially happening. It is something that has happened. We consistently see now for many months threat actors, whether they're cyber criminals or nation state actors that have been that are fully empowered by artificial intelligence. Just last week, my team published a report that described the previously unknown threat actor from a Russian nexus, which targets Ukrainian forces on the field. And AI is the thread that links all of their operations. They use AI to create malware implants. They use AI to find vulnerabilities. They use AI to create lures targeted to entice soldiers that are taking a well-deserved time off from the front line. This is not something that is going to change. We speak about mythos as at length. Mythos should be an indicator of the new status quo. Tomorrow there should be a new model. There will be a new model more powerful than mythos. We will have the same discussion again. The point is AI is here to stay and it is somewhat accessible to the threat actors. Luckily, like as with any dual-use technology, AI is also available to defenders. We live in a world where it's not sci-fi saying that in a few years, you can challenge me on the years, the timing is something we can debate, but there will be autonomous agents running inside our own organizations, assessing our attack surface and autonomously working to reduce the threat that we face every day. This is not sci-fi. We can debate, is it months, years? That's a good discussion. Now, but to make sure that us defenders can leverage these capabilities, we need to establish a mechanism for which sustainable access to artificial intelligence is available to everybody. We cannot just think about governments, big players, and special entities. We live in a digitally connected world. We are all part of a very sophisticated supply chain, and I think I could quote a number of incidents that did not originate with the final target, but they originated upstream in their supply chain. So this is the thing we need to address, and I would like to stress. We need to give sustainable access to AI for everybody, defenders and every entity in the supply chain, governments or not.
Thank you, Paolo. I'm thinking that because of such insight we just heard, maybe I should allow a little bit time for anyone to react on each other's comments. I think maybe at least we have some. Yeah.
Yeah, if I may to react to all of the speakers a bit here. I think I absolutely like the idea that James said about the cognitive space, because the cognitive warfare is going to be bigger during the AI. And we don't have institutions for that. NATO is not about content in your brain type of situation, right? So it's a new challenge which we are all facing, but we have read the reports how the Russian troll farms are now using the AI to amplify those false narratives in most of the democratic nations in Europe. And there are many, many examples of how those Russian special operations are playing on the emotions between the Muslim communities versus Christian communities and everything what could be exploited in Germany, in France, and so on. So I think this is a big problem, and of course this is not up to this panel to resolve this problem, but my question would be, who should be dealing with this problem? Okay. Next, the cost of application that the former French minister mentioned. I think the Ukrainians had it done in few weeks because they didn't have a choice. So I think all this cost talk that we hear a lot in Europe and in the United States is a bit artificial sometimes to me. Of course, not all of us here are under the wartime situation where we have to do it. And of course, the Ukrainians have this advantage, or maybe it's very sad if you think that all these 500 to 600 developers that they have in the basement of the Ministry of Defense are 23 to 32-year-old most brilliant programmers of the country, which had been drafted because there is war in country. So otherwise they would be in the civilian sector, in the gaming industry, or DJs or whatnot, right? And all this young talent is there in the Ministry of Defense in the basement and is developing tools, basically how to better kill the enemy. So it's quite sad if you think about the young lives there, but at the same time, that's how they have achieved this kind of advantage which they have. We cannot do it in our maybe not so frontline nations. Maybe we can do it in Finland and Estonia and Latvia or so on, but the further you move away from the Russian border, the less urgency the people feel about the geopolitical situation in Europe. So, but the talent is here. And the question is how to mobilize the talent. So I don't think there is the cost problem. I think the problem lies somewhere else. So that's my question to the French colleague. What exactly we could do actually more creatively to have those applications also developed without huge monies here. And to the last speaker, you're absolutely right. We have to protect also the everybody with the AI, not just the big players that have all this money. And again, we are now in the new playing field with all these tools. And I think there are some initiatives like counter-ransomware initiative and some others. And there are models. Last week at the CyCon conference in Tallinn, we heard about the Singaporean model, for instance, how they are setting up now a state-owned company helping the small and medium-sized enterprises to fight with this unfair situation where the companies are attacked with nation-state tools. So, and my question is, can we do it the same here in Europe?
Can I take this one?
Yeah.
I surely hope we can do it. I think that, of course, the devil is in the details. In terms of creating one or more set of sovereign models, maybe purpose-built. We need to sort out some really deep infrastructural issues. The first one is data, right? We need to get access to data, the right data. We all know that telemetry, to be fair, telemetry comes cheap, but the right telemetry doesn't. And that's the problem. We don't want to train against some, let's say, less than optimal data, because then we cannot trust the model itself. Then we need to embed some sort of transparency into this model. I mean, we unfortunately these days have to speak of conflict. We have to speak of application of this technology on the battlefield. We don't want to have to second guess the model unnecessarily when in the heat of battle. We need to design human in the loop kind of capabilities. So, I mean, I could go on, I will not. I can see the audience thinning very much, but surely I'd love to see European models that can help us get into a more stable relationship also towards our friends across the Atlantic. Yeah.
Thank you. Any other reactions? If not, it just also sort of provoked my thought as well. I was thinking when we talk about the challenges, for instance, with the infrastructure, talking about cloud capabilities or the cybersecurity capabilities, any of that, like it was said, it's firstly difficult to do and it requires a lot of resources, financial and otherwise. Just made me think that what do you think? For example, if we would it make sense if we would take the example of, for example, the latest EU, once again, regulatory proposal, of course, but anyway, there is a thought there, the EU Industrial Accelerator Act, because the question in that is not a cybersecurity related piece of legislation, but there is a thought in there, which is the one. What do we need? What is the best sort of way, best strategy to go about? Is it made in Europe or is it made with Europe? So how do we combine all the necessary resources and capabilities to be able to really target our challenges, our headline suggests? So any thoughts on this?
Yeah, you talk about the cloud, but we can also talk about frontier models and the question of dependency. And the Mythos example is quite interesting. Should we wait for Europe to access such models, or should we accept that opponents might access such models for a few months before us? Should we make it mandatory for this company to share it with European institutions because they shared it with others and they do have business in our continent? Do we decide that sovereignty means that we only use our local Europe-made models for security? Or do we believe for security-level discussions in NATO-like architecture when we are capable for the last decades to make the right balance between autonomy and sharing strategic capabilities? And the question the example you gave about the new industrial cloud strategy at the Commission level is a tough moment in history. If we say the least, we need to protect ourselves with the help of our most important partner, which are the United States. But at the same moment, we also have to go out of a dependency of the United States, which is also our most important partner. So you have people at the same moment negotiating the highest level of partnership with the US and investing massively to not be dependent on them. We've done that for nearly a century, so we know how it can go well and how it can go bad. But this year is not it's a interesting year in terms of finding the right path. So do we do it with Europe? Of course, only in Europe, of course, but with the US as well. So that's the balance of our new complex world.
Thank you. NATO certainly is, you have to live and materialize some of these challenges in fact. So any thoughts?
Well, yeah, and this isn't an official NATO thought, but I do think that a variation of what Sam said before is important for us all to remember. All of these considerations of politics and sovereignty and long-term dependencies are really important. And I don't just say that. They are important. My own country, Canada, is deeply engaged in a sovereignty discussion. But I think we also have to kind of rank the hierarchy of challenges. It is our primary responsibility to ensure that every citizen in NATO countries has physical security, that the lights stay on, that they get their data, that they have the heat in their homes and the water still runs. And that has to be what we go for first. We have to ensure that. And we are in a moment when physical security is, military security is a little bit less assured than it used to be. These new frontier AI models are raising cybersecurity risks to the rest of that list. So from my point of view, our primary mission is to ensure that all of that works. And then we have to ensure that we manage all of the other considerations that need to be taken into account. So we don't have endless time to wait for example, a European sovereign hyperscaler to build a cloud architecture comparable to what the American hyperscalers have. It doesn't exist. There are little bits, and by the way, when I say there are little bits, NATO is taking advantage of those little bits as we are building our cloud architecture, which is federated, it is transnational, and so we really are committed to this, European and North American, as I described earlier. But I fear a little bit that we are slowing down, or we're not going as quickly as we could to ensure the basics in terms of military security and functioning while we debate a little bit some issues which are very, very important, but which can't get in the way of assuring fundamentally that the lights go on in every sense of the term.
So coming back to the issue, what, like you said, NATO does things to make it work. So how to make it work? You also mentioned interoperability. To me, it sounds like, which it is, at the same time, is that NATO runs its own standardization process. So is there something we can learn from that? How do we transcend something along those lines to the other domains, to the other sectors?
That's a great question, and sometimes I describe NATO as just a gigantic standardization agency, because really what we do is provide standards and provide a backbone and a nervous system. So we don't have forces of our own. We just make sure everybody can work together, and we have a plug-in for everybody to do that. And of course we have somebody on top who can direct all the military operations, who has the wonderful title of Supreme Allied Commander, which is, I think, the best business card you could have in any context. One of the key elements, which I think is really, really important and lends itself to this discussion, is the people who you don't see but who do the standards, and now I work with them, are very, very, they're far ahead on public-private partnership. They are way ahead of the rest of the organization. So these standards are industry standards, which we take on board. We adapt for military requirements, but we adapt them with industry. And I think what I am getting as I understand this issue more and more is we need a profoundly different, more organic relationship between governments and the private sector when it comes to AI, when it comes to securing our systems. We need a permanent partnership at all times, including for the resource question. In fact, I was just shown that a couple of companies in the last couple of days have decided to put $5 billion into, and 20,000 engineers to look at repairing or looking into the risks posed by open source code in large models. And they're working to fix it. This money deployed that fast with that many experts is something which governments couldn't do. but private industry can do it, and we benefit from it because we depend on that. So we are building, just to give you an example, an integrated cyber center at our military headquarters. Civilian experts, military experts, intelligence personnel, and the private sector all plugged in. And that way, it's an organic relationship. And I think that that's something the standards experience has demonstrated can work.
Thank you. So let's take another challenge or a sub-challenge in our topic. The sort of issue around the strategic dependency, strategic advantage, and so on. In your view, where is the sharpest pain point? AI in critical infrastructure, is it more of a risk than a benefit, given the vulnerabilities in the supply chains, data dependencies, software vulnerabilities, and so on? So maybe Paolo can start.
It's a very difficult question. I think right now I would say I look more at it as a vulnerability, just to continue with the cheerful thinking. The point that I'm trying to make is that we have, as usual, rush ahead in implementing technology that is transformative. It brings a lot of benefits, but we have not done it while keeping pace with understanding how the technology works, what are the implications of the implementation of these technologies. If I look at the private sector, there we have had organizations that have rushed to implement this because they were told from everybody, hey, if you don't do this, you can run your company with 5% of the staff that you have today using AI. Never a line of code will be written by a human, and it will be perfect, no problem. With this promise, the pressure on board of directors and CEOs has been dramatic. So the result is that we have seen this technology pervade everything, essentially becoming part of critical infrastructure and introducing risks. The risks are many, like just a few. Opacity, like we don't know how it works. I, as an intelligent professional in cyber, of course, do not have visibility of how threat actors use the model provided by a model vendor, because that information is exclusively available to the model provider, because they sit at the center of the transfer. The discussion about open source software is, I think it should warrant a full discussion, but I think I hear what you were saying earlier about the initial investment for private industry. But the question becomes, if open source software is the backbone of our digital infrastructure, and we know that AI models are not a one-off, but they are a continued development and improvement, how are we going to continuously secure this infrastructure? Is there going to be the open source software police? That's like another thing I might have on my business card.
There is going to be.
Who is going to pay for it? That's the thing. The Anthropic, sorry for using the name, but they have provided credit to those companies they partner with. They've not provided unlimited access for humanitarian purposes to those using it. They are scanning now the open source software pool, but there's no guarantee they will continue to do so. So we have, I think, some fundamental discussions to have in terms of how do we govern this technology, what is going to be our relationship with these entities, the privately held frontier labs that right now hold life and death power on the competitiveness of military entities, private companies, nation states. So yeah, maybe a grim perspective, but I hope next year to be back and say that I was all wrong and it's all wonderful.
Yeah. Mr. Mahjoubi?
No, I want to be positive if we look at the largest picture at the moment, because everything we are talking about happened the last 6 months during a war that were 1,800 kilometers from here, with a complex world equilibrium at the moment, and still we are capable of having such common capacities to act. What is interesting is what's going to happen right after Mythos. You know, some of the French banks that were not invited in the Mythos project, Glasswing project, asked to some European frontier model to invest more in cybersecurity models and cybersecurity harness for these models, asking them and telling them that they would participate and invest to help them doing so. And it happened last week. So private sector can mobilize, private sector depends on open source software and open source communities. And we've seen during the last 8 weeks with the two major acts on open software repository, the impact that it had on multiple economical actors, that now awareness is full. But what is important is transforming awareness in money. And your last question says it's not always about cost, it's also about talents. And that's a subject. Do we have all our digital talents mobilized in cybersecurity? In a way, yes, but not completely. And we do have right now a transformation in all the IT sectors, especially for young to join the IT industry. And we have to be sure that all these young people that join the IT industry are still welcome in private companies that can still pay them, so that we train the next generation of cyber actors, AI actors, etc. It's still the case, but you know, top European service IT providers are announcing some freeze in terms of recruitment, are announcing disinvestment in some of these capabilities. And it's always dangerous because the public sector's talent pool is always dependent on this private sector, so that we have a path for our people to go to the private sector and come back to the state. And if there's something that doesn't work on that, we lose a lot. So yeah, talent is sometimes even more important than money, cash money at the moment.
Thank you. Anything?
I think, well, it's gonna be very tough 5 years when all these vulnerabilities are coming out. And we heard at the last panel that it's now 6 hours when the Chinese DeepSeek model is unleashed on software, and the criminals can find a 0 day and exploit it. So we will see lots more criminal activity, ransomware, and the small and medium-sized businesses in Europe will be the prime target. So I think Europe is going to be hit hard by all these AI models because of the cybercrime actors. And how we deal with that as governments, I think this is a big challenge.
Thank you very much. So maybe challenging the idea a bit, not challenging the fact that, yes, it's easy to believe that we'll be hit hard. But at the same time, for example, when we had a previous comment about the regulation sort of being late in terms of what the requirements are, at the same time, one of the sort of strategic approaches to defense, I mean, governing cybersecurity risk posture and implementing controls as per any organization. We know that in Europe, the EU NIS2 regulation did indeed the fact that it gave a list of things that has to be implemented by all important actors. And surely so that they are to a certain extent modern. Will they be sufficient? Probably not at this moment. But still, sort of in between, there is something that has risen, at least the discussion in our circles, is the fact that this sort of onionized onion approach that we need to have layers of controls precisely for that purpose, because we don't know exactly what the AI enhanced threat actors will be doing. We just know that layers will be penetrated, but how many of them and which one and in which order? So what do you think about this idea? That is it really futile, or are we still setting a good sort of foundation?
Maybe I have one intervention and a question for you. If you look at the definition in NIS2, it talks about pen test. But when you look at the top security provider in the world, the one who are offering pen test as a service, the one who are doing automated pen test, the one who are doing bug bounty platforms, they are all of them changing their business model right now. They are all automated at the highest capacity at the moment. They are thinking of new ways to sell their service and product. We talk about tech-enabled services with partly software, partly service executed, with a human, without a human, etc. So we can't even put that in a legislation because it doesn't exist yet. Because the private sector is reacting. When we look at public cybersecurity agencies, they are all transforming the way they operate. If you look at ANSSI in France, the dream of everybody is having ANSSI securing all SMEs, all public sector, all enterprise, and expecting 200 people securizing 66 million people and all their companies. It doesn't exist. It can't exist. We need a private sector. We need rules. So my question is, what's next in your product? What's next in the service in your industry? What is coming in the next few weeks and months that will transform the model? And how can we even change the words in the NIS2 mandatory investment in terms of product and services?
Well, not an easy question again. What I can tell you is that cyber will be reshaped by AI, like everything else. Exactly as you were saying, like entire types of or subsectors of the cybersecurity industry are now rethinking, do we need to exist? Anthropic Code, or I don't recall the exact name, but the part that does source code review is attacking this kind of CI/CD pipelines and source code review systems. And we likely kind of cut a big slice out of those business models. Vulnerability discovery will be challenged quite dramatically. But here I have to be cheerful because this is the same transformative approach will bring out opportunities to strengthen our defenses. So the flood of vulnerabilities that we are about to see will put under pressure incident response processes, vulnerability management processes, threat detection processes. But the same technology will allow us to implement those same capabilities for defense. So some of this business model will just evolve. How? Difficult to say. In terms of regulatory advice, what I will tell you is that I can guarantee one thing, that threat actors will not read the regulation. We can put whatever red tapes we want. They will do whatever they want. They will get access to the model that we don't want them to have access, and they will use it against us. So we need to look at the regulation in a way that allows us to move fast without stifling innovation, growth, but of course also without worsening this situation that I described earlier where technology is unleashed against, that sounds bad, but let's say entities that are not prepared for it, yes.
All right, I think we are quite soon closing.
I would say it is time, and actually I have a question. Can I hack your panel?
Well, yes, definitely. That was the plan, actually. I was thinking about the audience, but please do.
I'm part of the audience. now. But yeah, I would like to use the Paris format for these two questions because, you know, we have this EU node and the US node, but we also have the national national security strategy who said that everything must be US-based, US technology-based. And I was listening to this question of standards. So how can we mitigate that kind of strategies, the European one who wants its own capacities, and on the other side, our colleagues from the US trying to implement their standards as a base. So this is for you, James. How are you doing the balance? But at the same time, well, I was listening to Mounir, and we were talking about money. And these days, yesterday, today, and tomorrow, we are here in France discussing the military budget. And this is a question of the 5% market for NATO. So how can states finance these efforts in the middle of all of them? Should we take the private sector money? So how are you seeing the financing of the sovereignty, let's say? And yeah, Paris format, I'll tell you. But you can say I can't answer. That's allowed. But yeah, these two kind. How can we mitigate both standards and wish to have the leadership? In 5 minutes.
She's going go. So I'll try to start it. At least the approach. I mean, NATO has to sort of have one foot on either side of the Atlantic, which means when they move apart, it can get a little bit uncomfortable. But we try to keep them together. The question that you raise is one that's being raised, of course, all the time, and our approach is actually pretty straightforward. We want a multi-vendor strategy to everything. We want open architecture. We want multiple participants. We don't believe that we can or should rely exclusively on only a US tech stack, nor only a European tech stack, or I'll just throw my own country in there as well, Canadian tech stack. Not just for political reasons, actually not at all for political reasons. In the case of those of us who are down in the machine room, which is where I am, or I'm halfway between the machine room and the bridge, we don't believe that it makes sense from a redundancy, security point of view to have only one stack. So we do believe that you can get the best of both sides of the Atlantic as long as the architecture is open, that the models are open, that we have common standards, and actually, at the very least, interoperable standards and the ways in which we can connect them. And, you know, in the very old days of NATO operations, like in the 50s and 60s and I guess into the 70s, you know, it wasn't the case, let's use English as an example. Not everyone in all armed forces from every one of the NATO member countries speaks English. So, you know, it makes communication challenging. So what did you do? You didn't train everybody to speak English, but you had a few people in each unit who could talk to each other. They had the necessary communications equipment. They were able to do it. And that way you could coordinate. And I think that's sort of an analogy for how we can go forward using all these different models. We don't need to have exactly the same standards. We don't need to have exactly the same models, but we can connect them and have the sufficient connectivity and standardization to be able to operate together. And you raised the question of financing. So the 3.5% is spent on hard defense. Everybody knows what that is. The 1.5%, which takes us to the 5%, is on sort of less hard military things, but that are necessary for military enablement and functioning. And it's, to a certain extent, up to every government, and to a certain extent, a common discussion amongst allies to figure out exactly what that is. But what I can say is that, for example, data centers are militarily vital infrastructure. They will be identified that way. They are targeted in the Gulf very explicitly, so we know they're going to be targeted. But not just in the Gulf. I was at a data center in the UK Midlands, and I thought the discussion was going to be about GPUs and tokens, but actually 30% of the discussion was directed at me about how to secure a data center in Yorkshire against a drone attack. So everybody is worried about this. And I think there's some murky areas, but we have a kind of an idea of how to provide government money. But final sentence, I am absolutely convinced that we do need private sector resources and private sector speed. We should not move at the speed of government resources, government budgeting processes, and government bureaucratic procedures. We need to move at public sector speed, not private sector. Private sector speed, not public sector speed. We need to catch up. They don't need to slow down.
Thank you. Any other quick? All right. So, Mr. Gano, we will end now. Hopefully you were satisfied with the reaction.
Thank you so much.
All right.
And we can grab a coffee to continue the conversation.
All right. Thank you for the panel experts. Thank you, audience.